Good. Yes,
Welcome.
so first slide. Thank you all for coming. Now it's on. I can hear that. Great, yes. So when I was given this talk in January and I saw the other talks on the program, I got really nervous because I thought, okay, my talk is going to be the least technical one at this conference, and it's so far off the scale from everything else that I was really nervous about coming and talking to you today. But a friend of mine, I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and she said, don't worry about it, because they will come to your talk to relax and to forget about all that really highly technical stuff. So if there's one message from me to you now for the next half hour is, loosen those non-existent ties, lean back, and just relax for half an hour, and we'll talk about how to deal with people. So it should be pretty clear to all companies now that data science is something that's here to stay, something that companies need to do in order to succeed in the future climate of business. There's plenty of reports saying exactly this. So, for instance, there's this Booth report that says that the winners and losers of the new data economy will be determined purely based, sorry, mustn't move too much, based purely on the quality of their data science teams. And plenty of reports of that sort. So companies are waking up to the fact that they need to hire data scientists and they need to start doing data science. Okay, so that means that demand is increasing. And we've also seen plenty of reports talking about the enormous need for data analysts in the next decade. So for instance, McKinsey saying we need 200,000 just in the US over the next decade. And of course, what that leads to is an increased demand, but universities, etc., not being able to keep up in creating that supply of talent. And so, for instance, the EMC survey that said that 60% of companies now realize that demand is outstripping supply of talent. Okay, so what are we looking for then when we try to hire data scientists? Well, we want an expert in statistics who can do all the modeling and the fancy analytics work. We need an expert hacker, a coder, who can do all the nice programming. Obviously, they need to have 5 years machine learning experience. I mean, they need to be able to do all these reporter recommendation engines and stuff like that. Database management, I mean, this is the bread and butter of data science, right? So they need to be experts in that. They need to be great at data visualization. They have communication skills like TED speakers, the business skills of an MBA graduate, and add your favorite criterion here. Right. Okay. So now you've gone through all the CVs that you had that people applied with you, and you tried to sort out the ones that have this, and obviously there's no one left in the room. Because what you're looking for is actually that data unicorn that doesn't exist, that has all of those skills. Okay, cool. So what we really need to do then is to create a data science team. So someone who can do all of that for you. And the way I see it is that we've got a spectrum of skills from the sort of hard coding skills that we need to have through the maths and analytics and onto the business intelligence side of the business. So let's just put down these three roles on this spectrum. We put the data engineers in, we put data scientists in, and we put data business analysts. What will these people be doing? Well, your data engineers are going to be doing the really hardcore data stuff, the database management, the Hadoop management, and the data crunching and all of that really nifty stuff with data. Your data scientists are going to do the analytics work, the machine learning, and your data business analysts are going to be the one that interface with the business, that have an understanding of what the business needs, ownership of targets, and they will be doing the project management, etc. And where would you find these people? Well, these are my suggestion of where you might find these people, what backgrounds they will be coming from. And now, of course, I'm not trying to say these are silos. These are not set roles. It's not necessary that they come from these particular backgrounds. There will be some mix of people and what they're doing and where they come from. But as a general start, I think this is a good place to start. Now, I also don't think this is news to any of you. I mean, there's been so many articles written over the last 1 or 2 years saying you need to hire a team, you need to have these different types of skills. So I'm not trying to tell you anything new, really. But what I think a lot of people haven't talked much about is how do you make these people work well together? Because they will only be effective and work well once they work as a team and they communicate well within that team. So that's what I'd like to focus my presentation on, is how do we make them work well together? Good. Okay, so now we know that we need to hire data scientists, and we also know that we need to hire a team with different skills. What's then the ideal size of those teams? Well, different studies have shown that different numbers, but they all agree that it's somewhere between 4 to 9. That's the ideal size of a team. If it's smaller, it's going to be too driven by personalities, etc. And if it's too big, communication becomes too difficult. So it's somewhere between 4 to 9. And it's also very, very important to know that a team is going to be made up of different personalities. Nothing wrong with that. We all have different personalities. The trick is to make us all work well together. So let me just whiz through 2 ways of thinking around personalities as a little introduction into how one could make these teams up. So let's start with MBTI, or Myers-Briggs Type Indicators. You may have heard about these already. Basically, you ask people their preferences in 4 dimensions, and these then combine into 16 different types or personalities. So the 4 dimensions are extrovert versus introvert, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perception. And for example, choosing between extrovert and introvert, you would ask yourself the question, how do you relax after a hard day at work? Do you prefer to go home, relax and read a book, listen to some music, or do you prefer to go out to the pub with your mates? That's one way of thinking about that dimension. Another one, for example, judging versus perception. Well, do you prefer to be very goal-oriented, very planned? Do you always deliver before deadline? Or do you prefer to be more flexible, impulsive, and tend to hand things in last minute? Now, again, there's no right or wrong with these personalities. There's no better or worse. We are who we are, but it's important to understand that different people think differently. So if you are a team leader or you are a manager of a team, and you are J, say you have your Gantt chart ready from day 1 and everything's fully planned out, you may have Ps in your team who prefer to be a lot more flexible with their planning. And you have to think, how do I manage these people not to make them upset? So the other one is the Melbourne Role. So Melbourne was a sociology researcher who spent a lifetime researching teams. And he came up with 9 roles that we all tend to take to some extent in teams. So again, we don't have just one of these. We have all of them in some respect in us. But we have certain preferences, certain types we prefer to take rather than others. And fortunately, I don't have time to go through all of them. But for instance, shapers, so that's a little whip there. Shapers are the kind of people who likes to get things done now. Let's just go and do it, no faffing about. Let's just do it, see what happens. We can always fix it later, right? Versus a plant, who's the kind of person who might be quite quiet in your team, maybe a bit shy, but then they sort of feed on all that information that other people are saying, other people are doing, and then suddenly they'll just come up with that one brilliant idea, the one solution to the problem that you've been looking for. Now, what Melbourne found was that the teams that work really well together, that are really effective, are the ones that have all of these roles, to some extent, mixed into it. And it's clear to see that, for instance, if you had a team of 4 shapers, they would all be pulling in different directions, and you probably wouldn't get anywhere. You'd probably fail very fast because they all just wanted to do things. Whereas if you had 4 plants, they would all sit there and you'd hear the crickets creaking and not much would happen because they need the input of others to make things happen. So going back to my data universe, where would we put these sort of personalities? Well, if we look at the MBTI roles, I think between the extroverts and introverts and the thinkers and the feelers, you could probably place them anywhere in your team. I don't think there's a preference there. But I would propose that you should put sensing people. So these are people who are very logical and structured in the way they think, probably more towards the engineering side. and the intuitive people, the one who make decisions based on gut feeling, more towards the business side of your team. And similarly, you probably want to have the goal-oriented and well-planned people on the side that's doing the project management, and maybe have the more flexible people on the engineering side. And we can then add on the Melbourne roles. Now, I think there are a few roles that work pretty much anywhere in your team. They can work well anywhere. And there are others that I think you can start to distribute out based on what their preferences are. For instance, those plants, the ones who come up with the great ideas, they might be your data scientists, whereas the shapers could probably be anywhere. Now, I understand this could be a controversial slide because you don't want to peg people into certain roles based on what kind of people they are. But I think, again, it's a good starting point to start to think about what sort of people do I want to have in which role. Great, okay, so we realized we need to get our team ready, we got the roles, we got the right personalities in. What happens now? Okay, so there's been research around what happens to teams when they get started, and they tend to follow a certain cycle. So we start off in the forming stage. This is when we're all a bit shy, we're a bit polite, we don't really know what our role in the team is going to be. And so, yeah, we're all a bit careful and cautious. This then moves quickly into the storming phase. When we start to relax, our personalities start to take over. Maybe someone tries to take the leadership role and others are not so keen on that. And you tend to get into conflicts. And this can be quite a dangerous phase in that if those conflicts grow too much, the teams can actually end up destroying themselves. But most teams do end up coming out of that phase, and then they go into the norming phase. So this is when we all start to agree with each other again. We start to feel comfortable in the role that we've been assigned, and we start to work well together, which finally leads into the performing phase. This is when we are working really well together. We're an effective team, we know our roles, and we're getting stuff done together. What happens after that? Well, no team tends to stay static with time. So either the team might be completely dismantled, maybe it's not necessary anymore, or someone leaves, someone new comes in, and then the team can go back to either the forming or the storming phase again. So this cycle is continuously running. What's the learning point there? Well, I think it's advisable to start out quite lightly with your team. So start out not giving them too much stuff to think about, not too much pressure, because we know they're going to go through these forming and storming phases. And then as they come out of that phase, you can start to apply more pressure and start to give them the more serious tasks. And also, do keep a lookout. If you're a manager, keep a lookout for your team in the storming phase, because, as I said, it could be that if those conflicts grow too big, that the team might destroy itself. So they may need a little bit of help coming out of that phase. It's also been shown that teams that work well have regular feedback sessions. So they talk about what went wrong, what went right, what can we do better, did I upset anyone with what I said? And also teams that agree on certain ground rules work well together. So for instance, we all agree we're going to come on time to meetings. Might seem obvious, but it actually makes a difference saying it out loud. And also, for instance, we agree to keep our cell phones on quiet while we're in meetings, etc. So these things really help teams work well together, have respect for each other, and acknowledge the diversity in the teams. For data teams specifically, you should be aware that actually a lot of your communication is nonverbal and is in your code. So be careful about how you write code, and maybe not leave too personal messages in your comments. There are a couple of simple rules on how to keep that communication clear and useful. So for instance, be consistent in your naming convention. Having a function called calculate and another one calculate too doesn't help your colleague when they try to read the code. They'd have to figure out what they do. Also, make sure that you encapsulate really simple ideas into small little units with a very clear input and clear output. That makes it also very readable. Obviously comment your code, maybe not too personal, but useful comments and to the right amount, obviously. And also review your code. Once you've finished it, even if you know it works, obviously you test it and it works, but even so, go back and review how readable and useful it is. And maybe the hardest part of all, why don't you ask one of your colleagues to read it and comment back to you and give you feedback on how you could improve it? Okay, so those are some tips about good communication. What can cause miscommunication? What can be potential snags in communication in teams? Well, something that we all do all the time, even me standing here or you sitting there, is process data input in what's called the ladder of inference. So we start with a certain input. Data's coming in. This could be someone talking to you, or you're reading something, or just the body language of the person you're talking to. Your brain decides to process a certain amount of that data, not all of it. We then filter it with the cultural filters that we have. So this is prior information that we have about the person we're talking to or the world generally. We make some assumptions. From that, we get a conclusion. This conclusion feeds back into our beliefs around the world, so it changes how we see the world, and finally leads to some form of action. So an example of how this could lead to miscommunication is, okay, you sit next to Dave every day. Now you've noticed that Dave hasn't done his unit test for 2 weeks. I mean, that's unforgivable, right? Especially because you know it's company policy to unit test everything. Okay, this obviously means that Dave is being lazy, he's being sloppy. It means Dave can't be trusted. It means that people that are similar to Dave can't be trusted. And ultimately, I will never ask Dave for help again. But there might be a very innocent reason for why he hasn't done his unit tests, but you didn't bother to ask. And so in this extreme example, your team can become a lot less efficient if those kind of miscommunication happens. So let's assume they are communicating well in your team, though, and it's working efficiently, we're in the performing phase, everything's nice. How do we keep those employees motivated to continue working in that environment? There tends to be quite a lot of focus on money as a motivation, salary, maybe some on career progression, career opportunities. But actually, research on this has shown that there are a lot of different ways that people are motivated to work well. And for instance, the Wheel of Work says that there are 8 dimensions in which we could be motivated, including, for instance, purpose and passion. Do we feel that there's a purpose with our work? Relationships, do we enjoy our colleagues, etc.? But I'd like to stick my neck out here today and say that I think the people that you want to have in your data teams are the ones who want continuous learning and innovation, the ones who are motivated by learning more. I think those are the right people to have in a data science team. So how do we then encourage that? How do we encourage the learning, the innovation, and how do we train them? All right, here's a couple of ideas. Do internal hackathons on work time. So say one Friday every 2 weeks, a Friday a month maybe. Just let them loose. Let them do whatever they want. They come up with the ideas. They hack something out over one day and see what comes out of it. Maybe you support them with a bit of pizza, soft drinks, whatever. And it may seem as a waste of time at first, but you never know what comes out of it. It might be something really useful that you can actually put into your product or service later on. Encourage them to go to meetups, meeting other professionals in other areas, learning about new tools and technologies, something that could interest you. Then encourage them to suggest those new ideas to you, things that could improve what you're doing. And of course, once they come to you with those ideas, be open to those suggestions. Maybe it's something they could try at a hackathon, a Friday hackathon. Yeah, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it next Friday. See what comes out of it. Use obvious IT tools like Scrum and Agile. Internal mentoring is a really great idea. Get your senior guys to mentor your junior guys and make sure that they're learning well. And of course, social events can be a really great idea. Now, it's a bit delicate. You have to have the right culture for it. It can't feel like it's something that's forced. Oh, God, no, we have to go for drinks with the boss again. No, it has to be a culture that's right for it. But if you have that kind of culture, absolutely encourage social events. Good. So I've basically taken you through the fact that we need the teams, the way we can build them up, the way we make them communicate well and keep them motivated. So I just want to take one step back and talk for 1 or 2 minutes around how do we actually find the right people. So I'll just thought I'd share a little bit of ideas around how I find students for our summer program, Training Data Scientists. So first of all, what do I look for in a CV? Well, the first thing I look for is the degree. And for me, someone having a PhD is really important, because I think there are skills that you learn as a PhD that you wouldn't have as a graduate. So this is, for instance, problem solving, the scientific method, creative thinking, critical thinking, all those things that make you a data artist, which is a new word I heard today. So I look for the PhD, I look for where did they do it and what subject was it in. I then check, well, okay, so what technical skills do they have? What programming have they done? What statistical techniques have they used, etc.? Then I look for the overall look and format of the CV. Have they actually spent time trying to make it look professional, or is it just something they threw together in 5 minutes in Word? And finally, I do look to see, do they have any work experience outside academia, as it is a good indicator if someone has an understanding of what it's like to work in commercial industry. But it's not a must for me. So I want to make it clear that I do not explicitly exclude people, for instance, if they have a publication list on their CV, even though they shouldn't. But I don't, because it could be that they've just been in that academic bubble and they don't know what is expected outside that bubble, but they could still be really super motivated and talented people. The CV check for me, though, is just a hygiene factor, really. It's just make sure that they've got the basic skills that we need. And then the main point is the interview, actually talking to the people, because this is when you find out really what they're like. So I start by asking really, really basic questions around the technical skills. So really basic things like, can you explain Monte Carlo simulations to me? Because if they can explain that well, then I trust that they've got the technical skills. However, if you were to ask a really complicated question on how would you do sentiment analysis on this database, and they probably haven't done exactly that thing, and you're just going to make them nervous. And then the key thing for me is testing, are they quick at learning? Are they motivated? How good are they at being creative and the teamwork aspect? So a couple of suggestions of questions, typical questions that you could ask. Tell me about a time when you had to learn a new concept quickly. What motivates you? Testing creativity. If you had a sample of our data, what's the first 3 things you would do with it? So for me, the interview is when I really see the personality of the person and see the motivation and make sure that these are the right people to get to our program or that you should recruit. So that's it really. Breeze through that. The main point that I've been trying to make here is that I'm sure all of you who are here know that your companies should or are already recruiting data scientists. It should be in teams, complementing skills. Make sure you hire the people that have the right motivation, that are quick learners, rather than the ones who've done exactly the thing before that you wanted, because they're the ones who are going to grow with the company and be able to learn all those new great skills. Think about their personalities when you try to put the team together. Make sure they work well together in that team cycle. Communication, open and clear, good feedback, and continuous learning through, for instance, internal hackathons. Great idea. So that's it. I hope you found that relaxing and interesting, but not too relaxing. Thank you. Plenty of time for questions. Yep. Yeah. Right? Right. It's not. No, I totally agree with you that having a PhD doesn't automatically mean you're going to be a good data scientist. And I also agree that there can be great graduates who can become great data scientists. But something that struck me in reading books about data science, introductory books to data science, was that the books tended to spend about a third or even half of the book talking about things like, how do you make a hypothesis? How do you test your hypothesis? How do you make sure that your result is statistically correct, etc., that it's accurate? And it just occurred to me, I can skip through all of that because that was drilled into me during my PhD, the scientific method, as I mentioned. And so by taking a PhD, you already have that guaranteed. And there are actually a lot of PhDs looking for work. So there's enough that you can start by that and then sift away all the ones that are maybe not agile enough in their thinking. And you're going to be left with a really smart group, really motivated, and with great understanding of the scientific method. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's room for all types of backgrounds, especially in a diverse team like that. Absolutely. I think there was one over there before. No, okay, there. Yes. Okay. Absolutely. I mean, so in that slide, when I had the data universe with these are the type of background you'd look for, I totally agree that absolutely you could have a musician that can be great in one of those roles, or you can have a finance person that's great at data engineering. You shouldn't be prejudiced about that. Absolutely not. It was just a sort of general guideline. For our school, for instance, we have absolutely no restriction on your background. As long as, but you do have to have some understanding for statistics, and you have to have done some programming because otherwise it's hard to get everyone to the same level. But yeah, you have to be open-minded about where they come from. Absolutely. Is there some? Yeah. Okay. No, it could be. Sorry, I haven't. No. Okay. So it's a question around a type of projects, a type of way of doing projects called growth hacking, you said? Yeah.
Which problem I want to solve, and what's my target, my customer, and an hypothesis of solution. And now this is really this is well known. It exists.
Yeah.
So that was my question. If you had the opportunity then to see this,
Sorry.
lean startup and growth hacking.
No,
So
I haven't.
that's my input for you.
Okay. I will
Thank you.
look into that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. So what are the dynamics of growing a team incrementally? Well, I think first of all, it's difficult to find that one superstar. That's what I was trying to say in the beginning around the data unicorns. They're difficult to find. But okay, let's assume you did have your data unicorn. I think this team cycle, the forming, storming, norming, performing, is true, and it happens. And what will happen if you add people is you typically go back to either the norming or the storming phase. Because ultimately, a team works well when we all know what is my role in the team. How do I communicate with the others? Is there someone who is the informal leader? Is there a formal leader, etc.? And what are my tasks, etc.? So that's when they work well. And whenever you put a new person in, no matter how many you are to start, that will upset that whole balance. So something will happen. It won't just automatically work well. And I think if you do that, if you're the team leader, you should keep a close eye on how that's going. And maybe, I know it's something we don't like to do in technology, is to talk, just do feedback sessions. I mean, I know it's tough, but to do formal feedback sessions where you sit down and say what worked well in the team, and it's like one of those that you can hold the white feather and you can say whatever you want and no one's going to be angry with you, something silly like that. But to really make people say what didn't work and what didn't work, and maybe you'll have to do it one by one in chats between the team leader and each person individually. But it is important to monitor that situation, and if it's not working, you have to try to come up with some solution of how to make it work, because just leaving it and hoping it's going to sort itself out typically means it will just get worse. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
Tell me about a time when you have to think creatively.
Right now, maybe. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Gary was saying, tell me about a time when you had to be creative. And then he said he was joking. Okay. Well, great. Go out and build some great data teams then. Thank you.